It looked like a simple family photograph, but the truth behind this image would shock everyone who saw it. Professor Angela Martinez had spent 12 years studying post-Civil War American photography at the Richmond Historical Society in Virginia, examining countless images that documented the complicated decades of Reconstruction and its aftermath. But on a cold November morning, she discovered a photograph that would force her to confront the darkest aspects of Southern family history. The photograph arrived in a donation box from the Henderson estate in Church Hill, one of Richmond's oldest neighborhoods. Inside were dozens of images spanning 1870 to 1920, typical documentation of a wealthy Virginia family's life across 3 generations. But one photograph was different. The image showed the interior of a grand parlor, heavy curtains framing tall windows, ornate furniture, a patterned carpet. 3 young people sat together on an elaborate sofa. 2 white girls, appearing to be around 12 and 14 years old, wore matching expensive dresses with ruffles and ribbons. Their hair was styled in elaborate curls. Between them sat a black girl who looked about the same age as the younger white girl, perhaps 12 or 13. She wore a simpler dress, darker fabric, no ribbons. All 3 girls sat close together, their shoulders touching. The white girls had their hands resting on their laps. The black girl's hands were folded carefully in front of her. All 3 looked directly at the camera with serious expressions typical of 1880s photography. What caught Angela's attention wasn't just the unusual racial integration for 1880s Virginia, where segregation was becoming increasingly rigid after the end of Reconstruction in 1877. It was something about the positioning, the way they sat together, the similarity in their facial features that she couldn't quite identify but couldn't ignore. She lifted her magnifying glass, studying each face carefully. The older white girl had a narrow face, high cheekbones, and a distinctive small chin. The younger white girl had similar features, the same cheekbones, the same chin shape. Sisters, clearly. But the black girl had those same features. The same narrow face. The same high cheekbones. The same distinctive small chin. Angela's hands began to tremble. She had seen this before in her research, the terrible truth that lay beneath so many Southern family photographs from this era. The children who looked alike because they shared a father. The mixed-race children born from the violent reality of slavery and its immediate aftermath, when white men held absolute power over black women on their properties. She photographed the image with her high-resolution camera. On her computer screen, enlarged until each face filled the monitor, the resemblance became undeniable. These 3 girls shared more than coincidental features. They shared bloodline. Written on the back of the photograph, in faded ink, were 3 names: Caroline Henderson, age 14. Margaret Henderson, age 12. Sarah, age 12. Taken at Henderson House, 1883. Caroline and Margaret had last names. Sarah did not. Angela felt sick. She had documented this pattern before: white children given full family names, black children identified only by first names, even when they were the sons and daughters of the same father. It was the South's open secret, the truth everyone knew but no one acknowledged. White men who enslaved or employed black women, who fathered children with them, who then raised those children alongside their legitimate white children while pretending the relationship didn't exist. She spent that evening researching the Henderson family. Court records showed that James Henderson had owned a large tobacco plantation outside Richmond before the Civil War. The 1860 slave schedule listed him as holding 47 enslaved people. After the war, he had moved his family into Richmond and established himself in the tobacco trade, maintaining his wealth while many plantation owners failed. The 1870 census showed James Henderson living in Richmond with his wife Eleanor, daughters Caroline and Margaret, and 3 domestic servants. One of those servants was listed as Sarah, mulatto, age 12. Mulatto, the ugly term used in that era for people of mixed black and white ancestry. Angela called her colleague Dr. Robert Williams, a specialist in post-Civil War Southern history at the University of Virginia. When she described the photograph and what she had discovered, his response was immediate and grim. I need to see this. Tomorrow. Robert arrived at the Historical Society the next morning, carrying decades of research on Virginia families and the hidden genealogies that traced through both white and black family lines. Angela had the photograph projected on the wall. The three girls stared down at them, their shared features impossible to ignore once you knew to look for them. This is documentation of something that happened constantly but was never acknowledged, Robert said quietly. White men fathering children with black women, during slavery through rape, after slavery through coercion and economic power. These children existed in this strange liminal space. Everyone knew who their fathers were, but no one could say it aloud. He approached the projection, studying the photograph closely. The fact that they were photographed together is unusual. Most white families refuse to acknowledge the relationship at all. But some families, especially in the immediate post-war years before Jim Crow hardened, maintained these complicated household arrangements. The white children and black children might grow up in the same house, but with completely different futures. Angela pulled up the Henderson family papers that had accompanied the donation. Letters, business documents, family records. She found a ledger from 1883, the same year as the photograph, listing household expenses. Under domestic wages, there was an entry, Sarah, $2 monthly plus board. $2 monthly. For a 12-year-old child, working as a domestic servant in the household of her own father. Robert found more evidence in census records and city directories. In 1880, Sarah was listed as living in the Henderson household, identified as domestic servant. By 1890, she no longer appeared in the Henderson household records at all. Robert traced her to a different address in Richmond's Jackson Ward, the black neighborhood, where she was listed as a laundress, living in a boarding house. She was sent away, Angela said. Once she was old enough to be a reminder of what her existence represented, they sent her away. They found Caroline and Margaret Henderson's stories more easily. Caroline married a Richmond businessman in 1889 and lived a comfortable life in Church Hill until her death in 1943. Margaret married a doctor in 1891 and moved to Charleston. Both had children, grandchildren, full lives documented in family Bibles and society pages. Sarah's life was harder to trace. Census records showed her working as a laundress through the 1890s and 1900s. In 1910, she was listed as married to a man named Thomas Porter, a railroad worker, with 3 children. By 1920, she was widowed, still working as a laundress at age 49. But it was a document in the Henderson family papers that revealed the full truth. A letter dated 1882, written by Eleanor Henderson to her sister in Charleston. James continues to insist that the girl remain in our household, though it pains me daily to see her. She is the living proof of his betrayal, though he claims the situation occurred before our marriage and therefore should not concern me now. He says she is his blood and he will not see her cast out entirely, though neither will he acknowledge her as his daughter. So she remains, a servant in her own father's house, a constant reminder of shame. Caroline and Margaret treat her as a companion when they think I do not notice, but I have forbidden them from claiming any sisterly bond. That is a truth that must never be spoken. Angela read the letter 3 times, feeling sick. James Henderson had fathered Sarah with an enslaved woman. The letter's reference to, before our marriage, suggested this occurred during slavery, when Sarah's mother would have had no ability to refuse him. Then he had brought Sarah into his household, acknowledged her existence enough to keep her near, but refused to give her his name, refused to treat her as his daughter, forced her to work as a servant for the family that should have been hers. And Eleanor Henderson, his wife, knew the truth but blamed the child rather than the man. Robert contacted a genealogist who specialized in tracing mixed-race families in Virginia. Dr. Patricia Johnson had spent 30 years helping African American families document their ancestry, including the difficult work of tracing connections to white families who had refused to acknowledge the relationship. Patricia arrived with files documenting dozens of similar cases. This was systematic, she explained. During slavery, white men routinely raped enslaved women. After slavery ended, many of these men continued relationships with black women through economic coercion, offering employment, housing, money in exchange for sexual access. Children were born. Some white men ignored these children entirely. Others did what James Henderson did, kept them nearby but refused to acknowledge them as legitimate. She showed them DNA evidence from modern descendants. I've worked with families where the white descendants and black descendants can prove they share a common ancestor through genetic testing. But even with scientific proof, some white families refuse to acknowledge the relationship. The shame is too great. The truth is too uncomfortable. Angela organized a private meeting with descendants of the Henderson family. She contacted the family through the Historical Society, explaining that she had found something significant in the donated materials and needed to discuss it before any public display. 3 Henderson descendants attended, 2 great-great-grandchildren of Caroline Henderson, 1 great-great-grandchild of Margaret Henderson. All white, all in their 60s and 70s, all expecting a pleasant discussion about their family's history. When Angela showed them the photograph and explained what she had discovered, the room went silent. "That's impossible," one woman said finally. "Our family would never." "Your family did," Robert said gently but firmly. "The evidence is clear. James Henderson fathered a child with an enslaved woman. That child, Sarah, lived in his household as a servant. She was your ancestor's half-sister, though the family refused to acknowledge her." They showed the descendants Eleanor Henderson's letter, the census records, the household ledgers. The evidence was overwhelming. One of the descendants, a retired teacher named Margaret Wilson, began to cry. "I was named after Margaret Henderson," she said. "I've always been proud of my family name, our history in Richmond. And now you're telling me that history includes rape," Patricia said quietly. "Slavery. Coercion. And the refusal to acknowledge the humanity of a child who had no choice about being born into this situation." The meeting was difficult. One descendant left, refusing to accept the evidence. But Margaret Wilson stayed. "I need to know the rest of Sarah's story," she said. "If she was my great-great-grandfather's daughter, then she was family. Even if my family refused to see it that way." Patricia traced Sarah's descendants through church records and family trees. Sarah had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter, Mary Porter, had 5 children of her own. Patricia found living descendants in Richmond, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta. She contacted them, explaining what she had discovered. 3 agreed to meet with Angela and the Henderson family descendants. The meeting happened 6 months after Angela first discovered the photograph. In a conference room at the Richmond Historical Society, white descendants of James Henderson sat across a table from black descendants of Sarah Porter. Angela had the photograph projected on the wall, 3 young girls, 2 white and 1 black, sitting together in a grand parlor in 1883. One of Sarah's descendants, a woman named Dorothy Porter Washington, age 58, looked at the photograph for a long time. "My grandmother told me stories," she said finally. She said her mother Sarah had grown up in a white family's house, that she had been treated like family when she was young but then sent away when she got older. She said Sarah never talked about who her father was, but everyone in the neighborhood knew. Everyone knew, but no one said it out loud. Margaret Wilson reached across the table. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm sorry for what my ancestor did. I'm sorry that Sarah was denied her rightful place in the family. I'm sorry that you grew up not knowing this part of your history." Dorothy took her hand. "We knew. We just couldn't prove it. And even if we could prove it, who would have listened?" Angela facilitated several more meetings between the families. They worked with Patricia to document the full genealogy, tracing both families back to James Henderson and forward through 140 years of descendants. DNA testing confirmed what the photograph and documents had already shown: the white Henderson descendants and the black Porter descendants shared a common ancestor. The Historical Society organized an exhibition titled, "Hidden Families: The Unacknowledged Children of the Post-War South." The photograph of the three cousins became the centerpiece, displayed alongside Eleanor Henderson's letter, census records, and testimony from both white and black descendants. The exhibition was controversial. Some visitors were uncomfortable with the subject matter, wanted to minimize or excuse James Henderson's actions. But most recognized the importance of telling this truth. The Richmond Times-Dispatch ran a feature article. National media followed. Other families began coming forward with similar stories, photographs of white and black children who looked alike, family secrets that had been passed down through whispers, DNA evidence that confirmed relationships that had been denied for generations. Margaret Wilson and Dorothy Porter Washington became friends. They worked together to create a fuller picture of Sarah's life, collecting documents and stories from both sides of the family. "Sarah was my great-great-aunt," Margaret said in an interview. "My family denied her that relationship, denied her the Henderson name, forced her to work as a servant in her own father's house. I can't change what happened. But I can acknowledge the truth now. I can say her name as part of my family, Sarah Henderson Porter. That's who she was, even if the 1883 records wouldn't say it." Dorothy found Sarah's grave in Richmond's Woodland Cemetery, a historically black burial ground. The headstone was simple: Sarah Porter, 1871 to 1932. Beloved mother. No mention of the Henderson family. No acknowledgement of her father. Margaret Wilson paid for a new headstone to be placed beside the original, Sarah Henderson Porter, daughter, sister, mother. Finally acknowledged. The photograph remained on display at the Historical Society. School groups came to see it, learning about the complicated reality of Southern history, not just slavery and the Civil War, but the decades afterward when the legacy of slavery continued to shape families, communities, and the racial hierarchy that persisted. Angela wrote an academic article about the photograph and the story it revealed. Other historians contacted her with similar findings from their regions: Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi. Everywhere that slavery had existed, there were photographs like this one, images that seemed ordinary until you looked closely enough to see the resemblance, to notice who was named and who wasn't, to understand what the composition really meant. In Sarah's descendants' possession, Patricia found a letter that Sarah had written in 1925 to her daughter Mary. It was one of the few pieces of writing from Sarah that survived. "I want you to know the truth even though I could never speak it while I was young. My father was James Henderson. His white daughters were my sisters, though they were forbidden from calling me that. I grew up in that house, ate at a different table, slept in a different room, wore plainer dresses, but I was his daughter just as much as they were. He never said it. He never acknowledged me. But I knew who I was. Don't let anyone make you forget that you come from both sides of that divide, that your blood carries both the oppressed and the oppressor. Remember all of it. Sometimes the darkest truths hide in plain sight, in photographs that look ordinary until you see the resemblance, in census records that list children with and without last names, in household ledgers that pay wages to a man's own daughter. Sometimes you just need to look closely enough to see what everyone knew but no one would say. And sometimes, more than a century later, the truth can finally be acknowledged.